So there is a big issue with this Ferrari. There's actually a big issue with every single Ferrari produced since 2005, and there are open recalls on every single one of the cars Ferrari has made since then, and that is a failure in the braking system. Damon had already taken the car in for this recall. Their solution for that was a cap that they cut a groove in it to basically let air in. I think there was a huge vacuum that was getting built up inside and not allowing the fluid to flow. There are a lot of cars that have crashed because of that. We actually know personally of a car that had crashed on the racetrack because the brakes failed because of that issue. There's no way we're gonna put that pedal back in this car. We have to get an aftermarket pedal assembly, and we have to get it to fit into this chassis. And not only get it to fit into this chassis, but get it to fit in the car with our seating position that fits Damon. It's a very tight fit for him. Trying to find pedals that are gonna work are gonna be crucial, because if he has too much angle in his legs, then the steering wheel is gonna have to be pushed up, and nothing is gonna be ideal about the seating geometry. So we need to solve that problem. And the reason we need to solve that problem right away is that Damon is going to be here tomorrow, which means I need to build a lot more of this roll cage. Before we can even figure out where the pedal assembly could go, we have to have those tubes in place, because the new pedal assembly is going to hang off of the roll cage. We have a lot of work ahead of ourselves for the day. I want to get as much of this done as I can and order those parts. But knowing that Damon's going to be here tomorrow, I need to overnight those parts. There's a time deadline, and that is in just a few hours. Tim went in here and cleaned up a bunch of these edges that we had rough cut before, so added some radiuses to them. This is still not finalized. This is just basically first step, cleaned it all up. Now it's nice and smooth, so we're not gonna cut our hands when we're moving tubes in and out of here. All right, that's looking pretty good. So main hoop is all the way butted up against that sheet metal, and it is as tight as it's going to get. Gaps look good on either side. We're touching back here on both sides. So yeah, it's in the exact same spot. All right, now time to get some mild steel thin wall tubing, and I'm gonna start cutting up pieces, making this one piece tube out of multiple pieces. And then at that point, I'll tack them all together. We'll have a template for the tube that we will bend that will be the correct thickness, 1.75" 095 wall, and that's gonna go and replace that basically scrap tube that we're using as a template. Get started on that now. So it's getting rusty sitting over here. Decide how much bend I want to put in it, and then I'll mark it, and we'll take it over to the bender. Probably like a 30 or 40 degree bend up here to get it up as high as we can to the roof. Fit that in there, and then we'll chop it as we need. So we'll have that section, and then we'll figure out this area over here and just kind of work our way forward and just add bends, measurements, take lengths, cut them, weld them together. Figure this thing out as quickly as possible. All right, so I'm starting to take some notes here so that when I replicate this after this scrap piece is basically done, the template, I want to know what all the angles are before start bending it, so that it's easier to replicate. Instead of having to put the piece on the ground and measure the angle of every single bend, I'll have notes of all of that. And I'm also making sure that this notch here that we're going off of is straight up and down. So right now it's got some angle on it. It's got about 1.5 degrees, so this needs to get twisted a little bit. There we go, 0.1. Now I know after I notch my tube, because once this is bent, this is not gonna have a whole lot of straight left on it. It's gonna be a bend really close to the notch. So that means I'm gonna have to do the notch first when it's still a straight piece of tube. You really want that super tight fit, so you have metal to metal connection all the way around, and the weld is just building up strength around it and penetrating into the metal, rather than it just being kind of two tubes next to each other with a bunch of weld in between that's not as strong as it could be. So every little step counts, every little step matters, especially when you're building a very important structural piece like the roll cage. All right, so this piece is bent, and as you can see, because this is thin wall tubing, how the tube started to fail, collapse under the force. Like I said, this is just for mock-up, not worried about it. That's why you use thick wall tubing for a roll cage and not thin wall stuff. This stuff bends really easily and doesn't add much strength. We've got way too much bend in here. The bend's in the right spot, but because of the distance that I had to work with, if I put this any further back inside of the bender, it would just collapse this notch. The tightest I can get this bend is here. Honestly, this looks really good. It moves up quickly out of the way and right into this corner. That's all looking good, but now I'm gonna cut this section off and just take some of the bend out of it. I don't really like that, so I'm gonna start over again. That's the benefit of doing it this way, is that I only wasted this much tube instead of expensive DOM tubing. Oh, that looks so much better. Touching the roof skin and touching over here. And it is exactly in that corner as far as it can go. I'm happy with that. Move forward and figure out how to do this section. Now obviously this tube is really high, and to get it to clear there, it would have to come down a lot. So we'd have to come back from here so we can have less of an angle and see if we can kind of shoot past here, get it back into this area, because we can't do a bend down and then a big bend back up. I don't know how strong it would be, so we're just gonna avoid that. Get our 90 degrees to there. That whole thing should equal 90 degrees. If we take this car to like the Nürburgring, it needs to meet their safety standards. If we take it to Grid Life and run it over there, it has to pass their tech book. It's tough to do, especially in this car, but we'll do our best to get it right. Getting this roll cage design correct the first time is crucial. This, in my opinion, ties the entire build together, from the front of the chassis to the back of the chassis, the driver's seating position. It is one of the most important parts of the car as far as safety goes and stiffening up the chassis. But at the same time, I'm trying to move along this process as quickly as possible, because we only have a very short amount of time before I have to put the order in for a pedal assembly, but I really want to measure it up before I do so. This build is coming down to just getting it done as quickly as possible, but I don't want to cut any corners. It looks pretty good, basically where I want it, but we are running into this cast piece here that kind of holds the rest of these sections together, and there's some pretty big flat ribs on it. So we're gonna come in with a barrel sander, notch those out a little bit, give them some curve. That'll give us about 3/8 of an inch more clearance, about 10 millimeters, which doesn't sound like a ton, but the position of this tube will change from being down here to being all the way up there with just that little bit of extra clearancing, and that still will allow us to keep this tube in its spot where now you can really see how close everything is there. It is nice and tight. It is exactly where I want it. First step, notch that thing out. So yes, we are notching into a factory cast support piece in the roof. And yes, if this car was going back on the street the way it is, it would be dangerous. We're taking out a lot of support there. The tubes that we're putting back there are going to be much stronger than it was from the factory. All right, so Tim was able to barrel sand out a nice little section here. Do a test fit. This tube lined up. That looks pretty good, but there's a little bigger gap on the top than I want, but I don't think we're gonna be able to grind any more away from there. So I think what I'm gonna do is move this piece up into here. That'll allow me to get it tighter there and tighter here. Cut a section of this tube off, 1/2 inch. So I'll cut this tube down a little bit, and then it should fall in place and line up the way I want it to. All right, that's looking a lot better. There's still a gap here, which I might have to add another bend in to get that tube over there. But at this point, we've got 2 bends. So if we add one more here, that's 3, 1 down here, that's 4, and that's what we're allowed to do, 4 bends in this tube. So we don't have a tungsten grinder. Making a tip, looks about right. It'll work for tacking this together. All right, so now that we've got our 2 pieces together and the roof is basically notched in that section that was hitting here, I can test fit this piece again. I just did a couple lines on it to basically line it up out of the car, tack welded it together. The notch fits pretty well. Now I'll fit this in here, and then I'm gonna decide where to cut this piece and start bending it the other direction to get it to match this A-pillar as much as possible. I want to fit nice and tight in there. So let me see how this is looking. So we're right in the middle of our bend there. These are up. That looks pretty good there. That is nice and tight. This looks pretty much level with the chassis. That means that we're gonna have as much clearance as possible in that spot. It's not gonna be dropping down and closer to the head here or rising up for no reason. So I'm happy with that. The notch might need just 1 degree different. Right now it's a 5 degree, you might change that to a 6 or maybe a 4. I'm not sure which direction it's going in yet. That's a little fine tuning later, but that's where I want it to sit. So now we're gonna add the bend that goes here. So this whole thing will swing over and get nice and tight. And then once we get that in line, then we'll figure out what the bend is from here to drop it down where we want it. That's a really easy one to do. This one will take a little bit of time. We'll knock this out, knock that one out, figure out where the boxes are gonna sit. Basically, we need to make new boxes for the front as well. Once we get this done, that'll give us the exact spot where those are gonna go, and we can knock those out. So we got got another piece of straight tube. We got that cut and prepped for the next section. We measured out the bend and it looks like it's gonna be 15 degrees. So we're gonna bend this to exactly 15 degrees and we don't have to worry about the spring back in this material. It's so thin and it's so soft that if we bend it 15 degrees, it will stay 15 degrees, where when we bend the cage later out of the proper material, it will have some spring back, but we'll deal with that later. For now, we'll get this bent 15 degrees, fit it in there and see how it looks. This is like a total guess right here, but start a little long, see how it fits, and then we'll work our way back by cutting this tube. So this one's okay for now. I'm just gonna chop it where that mark is. I don't know if 15 degrees might be too much. 5 degrees less maybe? So where we're at, this is not gonna work. So let's try a 10-degree bend.
Damn.
Mark. Let's try that. Yeah, that's looking a lot better. This needs to get shortened a bunch and brought in.
Oh.
It's a good thing it's aluminum.
I don't know if that helps more.
Well, now that we trimmed it, I feel like we can use more angle. And that's the way it goes. So maybe this will work, but I need to shorten it up a bit more and get these two bends a little closer to each other. That will close this gap up, because basically the longer the section of straight tube is here, it's gonna push this farther away. So the shorter we make it, it's gonna bring it closer. So I'll cut off another inch off of this and see how this looks.
It's done.
So another thing that I'm looking at is, can we actually bend this? Because there are two bends that are really close together and limitations of the tube bending machine, I think we'll be okay. But after I get this mocked up in the car, I'm actually gonna bend this section in one piece and see if I can actually replicate it before I finish the whole tube and then go, yeah, it looks good, and then try to replicate it out of one piece and it just doesn't work. And this has to get stretched further apart, which won't work. As we just saw, I had to cut more to get it closer to make it fit tight. So we'll see how this fits. We might have to just bend this up and make sure that it is actually gonna be bendable. You know, I think that will work pretty well. Pretty tight here. There's obviously gonna be a little bit of a gap because this is curved. We can't add a curve there. So with this continuing on, 50 or so degree bend here and drop that straight down. I don't wanna have a big tube in your eye line and you have a cage that's over here, just makes this pillar even thicker, or if it's back here or something, you're blocking a lot of your view. In a road race car, that's really important because when you're looking down at the apex, you want to be able to see it. If this whole point of your vision is blocked, it's really hard to tell where you are on track. And you know, if you're trying to put the car within a ½ inch of that rumble strip, get it as tight as possible. That's important. And in drifting, same thing. As you're transitioning, depending on the angle that you have, you might be looking right through this pillar. So the narrower it is to your eye, the better. Having this tube fit and be covered by the factory pillar that's already here, that'd be ideal. We're not adding any thickness to that. So that's what we're going after here. Should have put a glove on. This thing's gonna have a lot of compound bends. All right, so that looks like it fits really well. I'm happy with that, but like I was saying, I have to make sure that we can replicate this bend in our bender. So I'm just going to try to rebend this section, just these two bends, because those are the ones that are so close together. The other one's far apart, that's no problem. It's just these two, maybe 1.25 inches between the two bends. That's really tight for this type of bender. Fortunately, I was able to cheat it a bit because the strap that holds the tube in place is actually pretty loose. So I was actually able to get both bends. So this is the 31-degree bend and this is the 10-degree bend, and they are both like, the start and stops are right on top of each other. So much tighter that we actually need it to be. So just wanted to make sure, but this is lined up with our 31-degree bend, and our 10-degree bend ends there here, but it ends here. So we've got like almost 2 inches of room to play with. So even if we needed to tighten this up more, we would still be okay. That's good news. Now we can move forward with the other bend and the other piece of section of straight tubing to tie in that bend to the floor and then build our boxes. And then we can figure out where the dash bar is gonna go. And then we can measure for a pedal assembly, because we need to figure that out very quickly. I think we got about a half an hour left before we have to put that order in for next day air. So we have that pedal assembly here for tomorrow when Damon's here, and hope that Damon fits in the car, because I don't want to have to do this all over again. All right, so I've got a mark of where that tube ends. I'll figure out how much more tubing I need for this section. Let's call it 40 inches. We need to start the bend. So we start the bend at 10 inches. Yeah, 40, I started at 10. Okay. So we'll do a 68-degree bend. We're gonna start it at 10 inches from the cut. I mean, that's a pretty good fit for a quick guess. I think I do want this a little further back. When we drop the cage down to be able to weld everything on top, it needs to drop down, but it also needs to shift forward. So if this is too tight in a spot where it can't move forward anymore, that's gonna make it really difficult. It's also gonna make it hard to weld the door bars in here. So if we get in a really tight pocket in here, it's gonna be hard. But if we move this back a little bit, getting door bars to fit on there the way we want, pushed out quite a bit, will be a lot easier. I'm gonna shorten this up a little bit. I'll start with about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. That looks pretty good.
It's wabbit season.
All right, so we took about this much off. It's about 1.5 inches. Look at this, my rock form case is grabbing the tube right now. All right, that is pretty close. So we're just hitting this little nub right there. So I think we'll sand this bit down. That'll close up this kind of 1 degree gap that we have here. We've got it contacting the chassis here and contacting the chassis here. Like, I don't think we can get it to fit much better than that. Yeah, let's grind this thing up and try to get this thing moved forward so we can order that pedal assembly.
Yeah.
Hey, what time is it? My phone died.
Oh, Mike, you gotta go. You gotta order the parts.
Dude.
Hurry.
All right, so I already put everything in the cart that I thought was gonna work. Throttle pedal, brake and clutch pedal, and a couple of master cylinders and stuff. So I'm gonna purchase that right now so we don't miss our deadline. All right, so we got the parts ordered. We've got balance bar adjustment knob. We've got the master cylinder reservoir that has clutch, front brake, and rear brake. We have 2 brake master cylinders. We have a clutch master cylinder, we have a throttle pedal, we have throttle pedal linkage, and then we have the brake and clutch pedal assembly. Here's the blueprint drawings of the race car pedal assembly. So it's very different than the factory Ferrari setup. This doesn't use a booster of any type, which is basically an assist. So you have a vacuum boost assist that makes the pedal a lot softer and easier to push, which is nice for the street. When you're on the racetrack, you do want a stiff pedal. You want something that the pedal feels the same every single time when you go into the corner. When it is vacuum assisted, depending on how much vacuum there is in the booster, you get different pedal feel. So you'll have more assist sometimes and less assist sometimes, which makes it really difficult to be relying on your brakes as much as you need to on the racetrack. The factory Ferrari brake system had a recall. It had a serious safety issue. Like I said, cars have crashed. There's no way that I was gonna put that back in the car. And there's no way that I was gonna drive the car like that. It's not safe. This is the proper setup. And this car is not going to be anything like it was from the factory. We're going to double the horsepower. We're gonna take about 30% of weight out of the car. It's gonna be a lot lighter. It's gonna be a lot faster, and we need the brakes to work every single time. That's it. It has to work every single time. That's why we went with this setup. Another benefit of this setup is it has dual master cylinders, which means there is a separate master cylinder for the front brakes and a separate master for the rear brakes. And what this helps with is different master to caliper sizing. So the front brakes, you might have a much bigger caliper and it might need a bigger master cylinder, where the rear is gonna run less brakes, smaller pad, a smaller caliper, which means you're gonna run a smaller master cylinder. Now, normally there's a compromise between that, and sometimes it's built into the factory master cylinders that are single from the factory. But with this, we actually have a knob where we can adjust the balance. So there's a bearing inside of here that slides the rod back and forth and moves that bearing. And as you push on the pedal, it will tilt and pivot and push one master cylinder more than the other one. So if you want more front brakes, you crank this thing in towards your front brakes, and then it'll push on that front master cylinder first, and it'll keep that balance between the two. So that's adjustability on the fly. If you go to a different track, if you're coming into a different corner, maybe you want more front brakes for this corner, more rear brakes to get that trail braking in for another corner, you can adjust that on the fly, just turning a knob. That's a huge benefit. And it has a clutch pedal set up because we didn't have a clutch pedal in the F12. The F12 never came with the clutch, and we had to add a clutch. So if we use the factory brake pedal, we would still have to add a clutch pedal to make it work. So this is kind of like the unit that has everything that we want already built in. So now we have our scrap piece template with 1, 2, 3, 4 bends. It's all fit together. Hopefully this will drop right in, fit perfectly, and then we can just come back here and replicate all the bends on the correct piece of tubing, and then reverse that for the other side, basically mirror image, get both of those done, make the boxes, make the header bar, make the dash bar, and then it'll be tomorrow. And then we'll have a pedal assembly, and we'll have a Damon, and we can put a Damon in that car and see if he fits. I think that looks pretty good. Pretty good there. That looks good. Ideally, I would like it up higher, but the way that that cast piece is so bulky in that section, and I don't want to cut out too much. It's a bit different than doing it on a steel chassis car. This section here is really thick, where on a steel chassis car, it's much shorter. So making that transition bend from the roofline down is quite a bit easier. Now comes the real challenge of taking that, measuring everything out, and replicating it on the correct tube. Bit of reverse engineering. We're gonna copy the bends, we're gonna copy all the rotation angles, try to make it out of one piece of DOM, and it should work. There's always a chance for a mistake, all right? Measure twice, cut once, but sometimes even when you measure twice, you get it wrong, and you have to cut it twice. Got our scrap tube measured up, and it was about 72 inches, so I'm gonna add 2 inches to that, cut them at 74, and then we can trim them down and notch them later. Ready to do our first cut with the correct DOM tubing that will be part of the roll cage. If I can say that I'm extremely confident that this is gonna fit the first time. So let's just hope it fits. This is all looking pretty good, but that is not right. It's like it's hitting here and it's got a gap here. Might have to bend another tube. Yeah, this isn't working. Oh, that's disappointing. I was hoping I was gonna get it on the first try, but guess it's not my day. After thinking about it for a while, I was just rushing it, trying to get this thing done. Because of that, I had to make the tube over again. Here's the second tube. What I did was set it up on the fixture table, so it was completely flat. We clamped the tube down and we put some scribe lines on here after basically taking our scrap piece that we made as a template. Did that, we did all the scribe lines on that piece, found exactly the center line of the bends, scribed them, marked them, basically put a punch mark in them so we know exactly where that intersection is of where the bender goes. Measured the twist in between here. So the first one was
20.5
millimeters. And then we marked this one, and then we measured the twist from there to this one and the distance on the tube. So we've got all those marked out. We've got them all bent now, and I hope that this is gonna fit. Better already. That looks pretty good. So we've got our extra length that we put on the end of it down there. So we have some room to work with, but that looks nice and tight. Cool. Okay, so now that we have all of these measurements, we just basically reverse them on another piece of tubing. We'll bend out the other side, and hopefully it'll fit exactly like this one does. Grease, it's super thick, it just sticks to everything. So not only do we need to clean off the grease so we can mark the tube with a Sharpie or anything like that, but also when we go to weld it, all of this oil, if we left it in there, would just bubble up and burn and completely contaminate the weld. So Tim's gonna take care of that for me and give it a nice shiny. All right, so second tube is finished up and hopefully it'll fall in place like the other side did. Yes, nice. Now we gotta mark this where the bottom of the tubes land. So I can make some templates and make an aluminum box that will get welded on there later. For now, it's just going to give us a landing pad. So when we get these tubes both in, they'll both land at the same height. We can trim the bottoms, get them to sit nice and square. Then we can make the header bar and then make the dash bar, figure out if the pedal assembly that we ordered, if it actually will fit. So moving forward, when we put the two tubes in the car, the landing points by the driver's foot and the passenger side foot looked like it was a little bit off. So we've got it up on the fixture table and we're gonna measure the degrees on each side and make sure that they're both spot on. 67.1, 67. Okay, so this is 67. Let's check the other one. All right, and the second one is 66. So it is 1 degree off. And 1 degree off over this length of tube is like an inch at the base. So even though it's only 1 degree off, it landed in a completely different spot. It looked very different. So we will put this one back in the bender, add 1 more degree to it, which will be easy because we already have all of our marks. So it'll go back in the bender exactly as it was. And we will add 1 to 1.2 degrees more bend in it, and then we'll come back here and check it again. All right, so we've got our line around the tube here that basically, I drew that line to mark at the end of this mandrel, and then we have our mark here, and then we have our scribe line, and this other die has a scribe line in it, and that will follow this if we get it in there right. If we get it clocked a little crooked, those lines won't line up. We'll twist it until it gets in the right spot, and then we'll add our 1.2 degrees more bend to this thing. We should be good to go, and hopefully they'll just drop in. It'll be easy. We can make the boxes, make the other tubes. So I'm getting tired. We've got a lot more work to do. I think we got real close. 0.2.
Oh, 1 more bump.
There you go. All right. Boom. 0.6. The other one was 0.5.
Yeah.
All right, I think I'm good with a 0.1 degree variance. I think that's gonna work. There is some flex in the tube, not much, but we can give it a little bit of wiggle room if we need to get it exactly the same on both sides. The chassis could be even the slightest bit off, as well as factory chassis are sometimes. 0.1 of a degree, I'm totally fine with that. So let's fit them up again and see how it looks. I think that looks pretty good now. They're both landing in pretty much the same spot. And obviously they're a little twisted because we haven't cut the legs to the same length yet. Let me mark where I need to make these boxes. It's the center of the tube, and that'll be the top. And then I'll figure out this, and we'll be good to go. It's that easy. Just make it out of cardboard and just make it out of aluminum real quick.
Just like that.
Just like that. So a couple episodes ago, we were playing with clay and doing a little arts and crafts project with that. Today, it's cardboard and tape. And then we'll turn it into aluminum and it'll be even cooler arts and crafts.
That's all this thing is, just advanced arts and crafts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I played with a lot of Lego when I was a kid, and now I'm playing with big versions of that. Now that we've got both of our A-pillar bars done, we came in and cut the bottoms of them off. This is basically the box. For now, these are just gonna get tacked in place, a resting point for that A-pillar to come down. These will get completely welded in later, but for now, just tacked because we still need to cut these out, move them out of the way, and drop the whole cage down to finish welding all of the parts that we can't reach. These are gonna go in, then we will put our A-pillars back in, tack weld those in place onto the main hoop so everything is basically in its position, and then we can come through and measure and design the header bar and also measure and make the bar that goes across underneath the dash, the knee bar or dash bar. Once we get that done, we will finally be ready to get our pedals in tomorrow. Hopefully they will just fit, make some brackets, get those in as close to the firewall as I can. Obviously you have to leave room for the pedal swing, so make sure we don't run out of pedal swing, and hit the firewall, put the seat back in, tack the seat in place, possibly or just drop it in place, and then we can have Damon sit in the car and check it out and hope that it all fits, because as you can see, this is a lot of work, probably 60 hours or so with the boxes and the other bars and everything coming together. A lot of time, and another 40 hours in the seats. All that stuff is finally coming together, and I hope it fits, because if it doesn't, we gotta do all of that all over again, and I do not wanna do that. That will not help us out on our timeline to get this thing to SEMA. We have so many other things we need to do that we need to get started on. But first, let's tack weld these boxes in, get those A-pillars in, tack those in place, see how everything looks. We have used this Harbor Freight cheapo MIG welder before, but only on steel. Now we're gonna try it on the Ferrari. I hope it works okay, because I don't wanna blow any holes in this chassis. That's the welder that we're working with. So, let's see how it goes. All right, so we got both the A-pillars in place and they fit spot on. I'm really happy with how they came together finally. We got them taped in place and we are ready to put a couple tack welds on them and move forward with this project. The first tack on the cage. And no, it's not gonna get MIG welded later. It's all gonna get TIG welded. Everything's gonna come back out. All right, so this is the last piece that we need to get the measurements to make sure that our pedal box is gonna fit. The last piece, get it done, tack it in place, measure for the pedal box, and we're done for the day. Wait for Damon to get here tomorrow, and then we can see if this is all going to work. Let's get this thing done. Make sure we line this up perfectly, because both of these hole saw cuts need to be exactly parallel. If there's any rotation in them, the notches aren't gonna be right. And we're gonna have to throw this tube away, because if we cut another notch out of it to make it fit correctly, we would then make it too short. So it's important to get this right the first time. Let's hope that I do get it right the first time. I'm gonna put the tube in, make sure it fits properly, but I'm going to leave it untacked so I can adjust the height of it for two reasons. One is for the brake pedal assembly, but the other one is also the steering column. The steering wheel is gonna be way back here. The dash bar is up here. The steering column is going to come through and clamp onto that crossbar tube and come up, but I need to measure the height with Damon in the car to see where that steering wheel center is, and then I can know what that angle is and make sure our steering column isn't going to run directly into this tube. It needs to hang below the tube. It needs a little bit of clearance, so if we do adjust the steering wheel up or down slightly, we have room to do so. We don't want to be butted up against the tube and have nowhere to go. A few things before we can actually weld this in place, but let's make sure it fits. Dude, that fits so good. Look at that, Mark.
Ooh.
Nice and tight. First try. This time. Very happy with that. All right, that was a long day. Now, two matching left and right parts. We have the boxes that we need to adjust a little bit, but they're in there. We've got the dash bar in place. Basically everything we need to test fit Damon in this car. I'm excited about that, but I'm also pretty nervous about that, because if he's not happy with it, he's gonna say, nope, do it again. I do not want to hear that. Damon, please don't tell me that. Just be happy. It is what it is. We've got it all the way back. It's hitting the cage. Just be happy with it.